I've never been the kind of person who believes places can remember you. People do, sure. Trauma sticks, memories linger. But places? Dirt and trees and concrete don't care who walks through them. At least, that's what I used to believe. This happened in the fall of 2018, a year after I graduated college. I was 23, broke, exhausted, and convinced that solitude would somehow fix everything wrong with my life. That's why I was driving west through Utah alone, chasing empty highways and national parks like they were therapy sessions I didn't have to pay for. I didn't tell many people about the trip, not because it was secretive, but because it felt insignificant. A week off, a tent, a camera I barely knew how to use. The kind of trip Instagram romanticizes, but reality usually punishes. By the fourth day, I was deep into canyon country. Cell service had vanished hours earlier. The road thinned from pavement to gravel, and the landscape flattened into an endless stretch of scrub, red dirt, and distant rock formations that looked like they were watching me. That should have been my first warning. I had planned to camp inside a well-known national park that night. I even had a reservation confirmation saved on my phone. But when I reached the entrance just before sunset, a temporary sign blocked the road. I remember sitting in my car, engine idling, staring at that sign like it was personally mocking me. I was low on gas, too tired to backtrack and absolutely not interested in sleeping in my car on the shoulder of a desert road. That's when I saw it. A smaller sign, half buried in dust, pointing down a side road I hadn't noticed before. I checked my phone. No signal, no map data loading. I zoomed in, out, rotated the screen. Nothing. Raven's Pass didn't exist. I told myself it was just outdated signage. Maybe a lesser-known BLM area. Maybe the park had expanded at some point and Google Maps hadn't caught up. That's the lie I chose. The road narrowed quickly, winding through low hills and shallow ravines. The sun dipped lower, painting the rocks in deep orange and purple shadows. By the time I reached the first marker, an old wooden post carved with a crude raven symbol, it was nearly dark. I should have turned around, but something about the place felt expectant, like I was late to something. The campsite itself was nothing more than a clearing. No ranger station, no bathrooms, no marked spots. Just a fire ring made of blackened stones and a handful of trees that looked twisted, their branches bent in unnatural angles, like frozen hands. There were no other cars. That should have scared me. Instead, I felt relieved. I parked, killed the engine, and listened. The desert is supposed to be quiet, but this place wasn't. There was a low, constant sound, almost like wind, but the air was completely still. No breeze, no rustling leaves. Just a hum. I set up my tent quickly, moving faster than usual, as if the darkness might rush me if I slowed down. My headlamp felt inadequate, its beams swallowed by shadows that seemed thicker than they should have been. When I finally sat down by the fire ring, I noticed something odd. The ground around it was worn smooth, not trampled, polished, as if something heavy had been dragged around it again and again. I tried not to think about that while I cooked dinner. I tried not to think about how the raven symbol appeared again on a nearby tree, carved deep into the bark, the lines jagged and uneven. I told myself it was just some edgy hiker nonsense. The sun vanished completely and the temperature dropped fast. I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and lay there scrolling through my phone, hoping for even a flicker of service. Nothing. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the clearing. I froze. At first, I thought it was an animal. Coyotes were common out here. Maybe a deer. Maybe something curious about the smell of food. But animals don't walk like that. These steps had rhythm, weight, pauses. I held my breath, listening as they moved closer, then farther, then closer again. The sound stopped right outside my tent. I waited for breathing, for fabric to shift, for anything. Instead, I heard a voice. Not loud, not threatening, just calm. "You shouldn't stay here after dark." "I didn't know," I whispered. "The sign." "It always starts with the sign." I don't know why, but that sentence chilled me more than anything else. I slowly unzipped the tent, my headlamp cutting through the darkness. There was a man standing a few feet away. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Thin, sun-worn skin. His clothes looked old, too old, like they'd been washed 1,000 times and forgotten by fashion decades ago. He didn't look threatening, but he didn't look surprised to see me either. "Is this private land?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "No," he said. "It's forgotten land." That should have been my cue to pack up immediately, to apologize, get in my car, and drive until my gas tank or nerves gave out. But exhaustion makes you stupid. I asked him if there were other campsites nearby. He shook his head. "Not ones you'd want." I don't remember inviting him to sit by the fire ring, but somehow he did. We talked, or at least he talked. He said his name was Eli. Said he used to guide hikers through the region before the trails changed. He spoke in vague half-sentences, like someone avoiding specifics on purpose. I noticed something strange while he talked. Every time I tried to look directly at his face, my eyes slipped, like my eyes refused to settle on him fully. I could see his outline, his clothes, his hands, but his features felt blurred. Not physically, but mentally. I asked him how long he'd lived out here. "Longer than I should have," he said. Then he looked past me, toward my tent. "You alone?" "Yes." Another pause. That's usually how it goes. I laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. He didn't laugh back. Instead, he stood up abruptly. "They start noticing you after midnight," he said. "Who does?" I asked, but he was already walking away. I watched him disappear between the trees, swallowed by darkness that felt too complete. I stayed awake for hours after that, replaying the conversation in my head. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the ground. My phone battery drained faster than it should have, dying just after midnight. And sometime after that, I heard the footsteps again. But this time, they weren't circling. They were coming from inside the trees, moving toward my tent from multiple directions. Slow, patient, like they already knew I wasn't leaving. I didn't sleep. That's not an exaggeration or a dramatic way of saying I slept badly. I mean, I genuinely never crossed into anything resembling rest. My eyes stayed open, my muscles locked tight, my mind looping the same thoughts over and over until they lost meaning. The footsteps stopped sometime after midnight. Not gradually, not fading away. They just ended. The hum, however, didn't. It pressed into my skull like low-frequency pressure, making my teeth ache. Every few minutes, my tent fabric shifted slightly. Not enough to suggest someone touching it, but enough to make me flinch every single time. I checked my watch obsessively. Time moved wrong out there. Minutes stretched too long, then suddenly jumped ahead. At one point, I was certain hours had passed, only to realize barely 10 minutes had gone by. Around what I guessed was 3 a.m., I heard something else. Whispering. Not voices speaking words I could understand, more like overlapping breaths forming fragments of sound. It came from the trees, drifting in and out like radio static. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't traveling through the air. It felt internal, like my brain was replaying something it had heard a long time ago. That's when the smell hit me. Smoke. Cold, old smoke. Not fresh burning wood, but the lingering scent of something that had burned a long time ago and never fully faded. Against every instinct I had, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The clearing looked wrong. The fire ring was gone. In its place was a wide, dark stain pressed deep into the dirt, shaped almost like a spiral. The polished ground around it extended farther than before, smooth and compacted, as if something massive had circled it endlessly. I took a step back. My boot sank slightly, like the earth was softer there, worked over, disturbed. That's when I saw the footprints. Bare feet. Dozens of them, overlapping, pointing inward toward the center of the clearing. None of them led away. I didn't think, I just moved. I threw my gear into the car with shaking hands, skipping half the steps I normally followed when packing. Tent stuffed, not folded, sleeping bag crammed into the trunk. I dropped my keys once and had to crouch down to find them, my heart pounding so loud I was convinced it would give me away. The engine struggled before finally turning over. The headlights came on and immediately illuminated something standing at the edge of the trees. It wasn't Eli. This figure was taller, thinner, its posture wrong, like its joints didn't bend the way they should. It stood unnaturally still, its head tilted slightly, watching me. I slammed the car into reverse. The tires spun, kicking up dust and gravel, but the car didn't move. Something was gripping it. I felt it, not physically, but through the steering wheel. Resistance, like trying to pull free from deep mud. The hum surged, vibrating the dashboard. My radio flickered to life on its own, blasting static so loud it made me shout in pain. Then the grip released. The car lurched backward violently, nearly sending me into a tree. I threw it into drive and floored it down the narrow road, branches scraping against the sides as I sped away. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I drove until the sky began to lighten and my gas light came on. Only then did I pull over. I sat there shaking, watching the sun rise over land that now looked ordinary again. Empty. Silent. I laughed. A hysterical, broken sound. I told myself it had been exhaustion, stress, fear feeding on isolation. I told myself Eli had been a local weirdo, and the rest was my imagination filling in gaps. That lie lasted exactly 12 hours. When I reached a small town later that morning, I stopped at a diner. I needed food, coffee, normalcy. The waitress, a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes, set my mug down and asked where I'd come from. Camping, out near Raven's Pass. Her hand froze mid-air. She stared at me for a solid second, then slowly pulled her hand back. "That's not funny," she said. "I'm not joking." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "There is no Raven's Pass." I felt that familiar cold tightened in my chest. "There was a sign," I said. "Primitive camping, 7 miles off the highway." Her face hardened. "Honey," she said, "there hasn't been a campsite out there since the fire." "What fire?" She hesitated, then sighed. "About 30 years ago, a group of hikers went missing. Search teams found their campsite burned to ash. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just footprints, bare feet, all leading into the fire pit." I swallowed hard. She said it was a cult, then they said it was drugs. Then they stopped talking about it altogether. I paid and left without finishing my coffee. Back home, I tried to forget. I succeeded in the way people convince themselves they have. Life filled the space. Work, friends, noise, screens. But the dreams started. I was back in the clearing, always alone, always late, the hum louder each time. In the dreams, I'd hear Eli's voice behind me. "You stayed too long." Then I started noticing things while awake. Raven symbols scratched faintly into wooden fences, into bathroom stall doors, into tree bark in parks I swore I'd visited before without seeing them. My phone began glitching again, maps rerouting me through empty roads, GPS insisting I'd arrived at destinations I hadn't. Once, late at night, I found dirt under my fingernails. Red dirt. I live nowhere near the desert. The final warning came 6 months later. I was walking home from work when I noticed a familiar hum vibrating through my chest. Not loud, just enough to feel. I stopped. So did everyone else on the sidewalk. Not intentionally, not all at once, but gradually, people slowed, then stood still, staring ahead with unfocused eyes. A man brushed past me and whispered, almost cheerfully, "It always starts with the sign." That night, I found a folded piece of paper taped to my apartment door. No writing, just a crude raven symbol drawn in dark red ink. And beneath it, a set of muddy footprints, bare feet, pointing inward. I didn't call the police. I stood in the hallway of my apartment building for a long time, staring at the raven symbol taped to my door and the muddy footprints leading inward, like an invitation or a warning. I checked the locks first. Deadbolt, chain, window latches, everything secure. I told myself it was just some sick prank, someone from work maybe, but deep down, I knew better. Pranks don't hum. That night, I didn't dream. I remembered. I remembered things I was certain had never happened. Standing in that clearing before I arrived, watching cars pass by the highway from behind the trees, feeling impatient, hungry, waiting. The memories slid into place like puzzle pieces that had been forced where they didn't belong. I spent the next few days unraveling. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering texts. Every quiet moment brought the hum back, low and steady, like a distant generator buried underground. I started researching the fire. It wasn't easy. Articles had been scrubbed, names omitted, official records sealed, but local forums and archived newspapers still remembered. The hikers weren't just hikers. They were part of a retreat, a self-improvement group led by a man whose name appeared exactly once before vanishing from history. Elijah Rowe. Eli. They believed certain places acted as thresholds, that if you stayed long enough, longer than the land intended, you could be absorbed, freed from the noise of the world, from identity, from pain. The fire hadn't been accidental. They had fed them themselves. Volunteers. I slammed my laptop shut, my pulse racing. That wasn't possible. I was born years after that fire. I had a life, parents, friends, memories that existed well before Raven's Pass. And yet, the land had felt familiar the moment I arrived, like returning somewhere I'd forgotten. That evening, my phone buzzed with a notification. I stared at the screen. For the first time, the map loaded. A single pin glowed on the display, 7 miles off the highway. I didn't decide to go. I just found myself driving. The road felt shorter this time. The sign was freshly painted, the letters clean and sharp, like it had always been maintained. When I reached the clearing, it looked exactly as it had before. The fire ring was back. The ground was smooth. And I wasn't alone. They stood around the clearing, dozens of figures emerging from the trees. Men, women, all ages, all barefoot. Their faces were indistinct, like details erased by time. Eli stepped forward. "You remembered," he said gently. "I don't belong here," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "You never leave, you just forget." The hum deepened. Images flooded my mind, not mine, yet painfully intimate. Fear, relief, the peace of letting go. "You stayed too long. That's all it takes." I backed away toward my car. "No," he said calmly. "You already chose." The clearing shifted. I wasn't seeing it as it was. I was seeing it as it would be. The spiral worn deep in the dirt, the fire roaring, bodies stepping willingly into flame, faces serene. I understood then. Raven's Pass didn't trap people. It waited for them to be ready. And I was. Every doubt, every exhaustion, every moment I'd wanted to disappear, it all led here. The footprints pointed inward because no one was dragged. They walked. I took a step toward the fire, then another. The heat didn't hurt. It felt warm, inviting. Eli watched, satisfied. That's when I heard something new. A car door slam. Headlights cut through the clearing. The figures recoiled, hissing softly, retreating toward the trees. The hum fractured, destabilized. A ranger stepped out, flashlight raised. "Hey!" he shouted. "Step away from the fire!" I collapsed to my knees. The world snapped back into place. By the time backup arrived, the clearing was empty. No figures. No Eli. Just me, shaking beside an unlit fire ring. They told me I'd been reported missing 2 days earlier. 2 days. I don't remember those hours. They escorted me out, gave me water, asked questions I couldn't answer. When we passed the sign on the highway, it was gone. No trace of Raven's Pass. Life moved on. I moved states, changed jobs, stayed busy. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet enough, I hear the hum, and I know the land is patient, waiting for me to forget again.